How's it going, everybody? I'm Burrhead2, and welcome back to this. Now, this episode here is going to be different compared to my other episodes because I'm not even planning on playing the game at all. This is an extra episode. Think of it like a DVD extra or something like that. Just little something, extra. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be going through the story that I've been telling the past couple episodes again. Now, the reason I'm doing that is I don't really feel like I did a very fantastic job the first time around. I mean, like, maybe satisfactory, but I think it kind of needed a little bit of, gusto, drama to, get the point across a bit more. Because I was just telling it normally, right? And I don't really feel like that really did it 100% justice, I guess. You could call it that. So I'm deciding to do it again. I'm not going to be playing the game at all, like I said, so that should, hopefully allow me to concentrate fully on telling my story, and I've also actually scripted it out this time, so that's given me plenty of time to think about what I wanted to say, and exactly how I want to say it. Now, this is going to be a little bit shorter, so it's going to be slightly abridged, sorry. I'm going to be leaving out a few things here and there that I think I mentioned the first time around, just because, you've already heard some of this stuff, you don't really need to hear it again. But speaking of hearing stuff again, a lot of this is going to be exactly what I said before, right? It's the same story beat for beat, let's be honest here. I mean, nothing's really changed. I'm going to be using a lot of the same mannerisms and phrasing that I used the first time around, so just imagine this to be exactly what I wanted it last time to be, right? Well, let me rephrase that. Like, this, what I'm about to do here, imagine that is the ideal version of what I did last time, or what I was trying to do at least. So, I guess, without further ado, we should get on with it. In the latter half of August 2015, somewhere in the 20 days, near at least the fourth game it seems, I was minding my own business looking out the backseat window of my parents' car. Suddenly my sister said, "Darn, I died." This got my attention, so I looked over to see that she was playing a game on her phone. Now, because I was the "you got games on your phone" kind of kid, I asked her what she was playing. She said that I wouldn't like it. I asked again. I received the same answer. I asked once more, to which I received the same answer once more. I never actually did see what she was playing, although when I initially looked over, I did catch a glimpse, but all that I could make out was a black and white image with a big circle in the middle, which is as generic gets. I figured that not being able to watch, I instead asked questions about it. Over the next hour to 2 hours, I gained as much knowledge as I could on the subject, it being the first game. It was very surface level, but encompassed everything you'd need to know. Basic story, gameplay, why this happens, why that happens, and basic character descriptions and names. But after some time, we were driving home, and I was once again looking out the window. I saw the sunset. It was pink and orange, but yet I felt two things in my chest. One was fear, and the other was regret. I knew at that moment that what I'd just done was a mistake, and that I'd soon suffer the consequences. The sunset meant it'd soon be dark. You see, my entire life I've always been very, very afraid of animatronics. The 2 times I was actually in contact with them previously, I made sure to keep a large distance between me and it, the entire building if I'd been able to. For an example of the extent of my fear, I had once seen a TV commercial that featured the most bare-bones definition of one. It was a tall, average human-sized robot that ran on a track, had 2 arms, and a computer monitor for a head. Even as something as simple as that managed to stick in my head for some time and make it hard to fall asleep. This rather intense fear of animatronics, compounded slightly by my likely non-worse-than-average fear of the dark, meant that finding out about a horror game about scary animatronics was never likely to end well. It should also probably mention my lack of constitution when it came to horror-related things. I never before had seen or read anything in or around or even near the horror genre. Once we got home, the sun had gone down, so it was dark. On one hand, I was fine being around people with the lights on, but on the other, I was nervous. After all, it was dark out and I knew what was to come. So time did what it does best, move forward at a constant and continuous rate. Time does not care about your feelings or about what's going on in the world. For better or worse, it does not speed up or slow down. Then the time came for me to go to bed. Still, I knew walking down the hallway, walking to my bed and getting into it that it was not going to end well. I understood this entire time that it was a fear, an irrational fear, but fears do not operate under rationality. Let's take, for example, something very simple. How certain right now are you that there isn't, let's say, someone unexpected in your house? How certain are you that someone didn't get in very quietly without you knowing? Logically speaking, the chances of that happening are very low, but they're never zero. If you became nervous or something to that effect, you demonstrated that even though something has an incredibly small chance of happening, people will still worry about it, especially when it comes with the risk of bodily harm. Again, I knew that this was a fear, but there's always that risk of something unexpected happening, and that unexpected thing being the thing that I'm worrying about. The chances of there being a big scary animatronic of some design, or something similar in my house are very, very low, but maybe I could have become a statistical anomaly. I laid in my bed for somewhere around 30 to 45 minutes. The perception of time gets skewed when you're aware of it moving at its constant and continuous rate, like when you're bored, or the opposite when you're doing something you enjoy. And I was keenly aware. My eyes were glued on the doorway to my bedroom, watching, waiting for anything. I didn't know what I was looking for, but all that I knew was that I had to look. I had to. My ears were tuned to any sound that would emanate from my house. Any unexpected sound, and I was being as quiet as I possibly could. I figured that my moment-to-moment breathing was likely fine, but anything more than that? Not at all. My breathing was slow and controlled, but not in a relaxing way. I couldn't make a single noise. It wasn't that I couldn't sleep. It was that I wouldn't sleep. I couldn't afford that. I couldn't afford not to watch my doorway to make sure that something didn't silently walk down the hallway or something 7 or 8 foot tall walk by the window next to me, stop in front of it, and then slowly look down at me. I couldn't afford not to listen for any unexpected sounds. I couldn't afford not to be aware what sounds I was making or how loud they were. I couldn't afford any of that for any less than the blink of an eye, much less several hours. But yet, still knowing that I had to sleep, I figured that it'd be easier in my parents' bed. So I did one of the bravest things in my entire life, grab my pillow, and get out of my bed. I anxiously approached the doorway, and probably took a grand total of 1 step to get across the width of the hallway. I shielded myself from it with my pillow, yet looked over to make sure there wasn't anything walking around or living at the end of the hallway waiting for me, horror movie style. Once I got in my parents' bed, I slept in between them, which is something I hadn't done for some years prior. But yet it wasn't much easier falling asleep. Sure, sleeping with your parents does make it easier to fall asleep, yet I wasn't able to regulate the sounds they were making it riskier. I was there for around 45 minutes to an hour, doing the same thing, waiting, watching for anything, listening for anything, and making as little noise as I physically could. This entire time I was incredibly tense. There was a lot of adrenaline in my system, and my fight-or-flight response was in high gear. But as the saying goes, nothing lasts forever, and I was no exception. As adrenaline left my system and my body could no longer keep up its tenseness, I began to feel the literal definition of exhaustion. I was extremely tired. But the adrenaline continuing to leave, my exhaustion continued to mount. I couldn't keep the tense feelings, yet my fight-or-flight didn't back down. Even though I could barely keep it up, I was still extremely nervous. I eventually got so tired that my vision would go blurry. My eyes would roll up in the back of my head, and I began laying my head down, but I would snap myself out of it. I couldn't let myself fall asleep, but it would happen again. My vision went blurry, my eyes rolled up into the back of my head, and I started laying my head back, but no! I couldn't let myself do that. I couldn't afford it. I had to stay awake. Still, it happened again. And again. And again. And again. Eventually, I got so tired that snapping myself out of falling asleep began to physically hurt. I don't really know why. Maybe it has something to do with being so tense earlier and exerting my overexhausted muscles, but either way, it literally hurt. Not a whole lot, to be honest, but enough to be pretty uncomfortable in the few short moments that I would experience it. I was so tired that I felt that if I snapped my fingers and instantly relaxed, it probably would have taken me up to a full second to fall asleep, and that didn't even feel like an exaggeration. I reached the point that I told myself I had to fall asleep. I couldn't do this anymore. I was trying my best to stay awake, and I was fighting myself to fall asleep at the same time. I knew it would be a tough battle to relax, and it was. But somehow, somewhere between 11:30 and midnight, I relaxed just enough to fall asleep. It felt like it only took 2 to 3 full seconds to do it. Thus ends the first night. Next would come Saturday, which through the inevitable passage of time would once again bring nighttime. Comparatively speaking, the second night was much easier. This time I started out in my parents' bed, and it only took me 30 minutes to fall asleep. After Saturday came Sunday, then Monday, then Tuesday, and so on. It went on for months, but all in all, I say it took 3 to 4 months to get comfortable with it. It was a gradient after all, so it's hard to pinpoint any exact time. But I didn't say get over it. That, I figured, would have taken me years to feel like how I did beforehand. But I never got to test that theory. Some things just never die. You just can't kill them. Well, maybe you can, but some things just don't want to remain that way. Soon enough, it'll reanimate and rear its ugly head. It will come back from the dead. It always does. Always. It always comes back. Some things just refuse to die. Time once again did what it does best and moved forward, this time bringing us the end of 2015. As I was scrolling through the user-generated content of Blox World, I've already talked about this, I won't bother to again, I saw a familiar name, one that I recognized I heard some months prior. Despite his blocky, cartoonish, not 100% correct, but it's close enough appearance. This is what he looked like. Need to remind you, this was the first time that I had seen what anything looked like. What ensued was another roughly 3 months of trying to get comfortable with sleeping again. The rest of 2016 was rather uneventful except for one thing that isn't terribly important to this story, so I'll skip it. Instead, I'll take this time to mention something else. Back while I'm still dealing with my first exposure, I developed a rather not good hatred for this game, franchise, anyone involved, although I didn't know anything about anybody, so it was kind of a blind hate. I wouldn't say this was entirely unreasonable given what it had done to me. Back then, and even to a lesser extent now, it felt like something that was designed specifically to hurt or torture me. It was such a perfect storm, after all. For some reason, due to my hatred, I told myself that I'd never utter a single name of any character of this franchise or the name of it itself. I'm not really entirely sure why, but it is something that I've held to pretty faithfully in the years since, again, for some reason. As the years went on, though, my hatred mellowed out and turned into an intense dislike for the franchise itself, not any person or thing in particular. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The end of 2016 had its own incident. I was browsing YouTube and came across a video. This video was uploaded by Game Theory, so you probably don't need me to tell you what it was about. After getting over the initial shock, I got curious. I knew that watching this video would be a bad idea, given what it was about. Willingly watching a video about something that had wrecked me a few times before wasn't a good idea, but that made it forbidden knowledge, and that intrigued me. I told myself that it was a bad idea, that I'd live to regret it, but that just made it all the more alluring. It was a morbid curiosity. I clicked on the video. I watched it through. Then I watched another one. And another one. All in all, I watched several. And I lived to regret it. Another 3 months of getting comfortable with it again, it resulted. I don't blame the videos, I blame the subject matter. After all, they did kind of have to use imagery of what they were talking about, and that was what got me. And the little characters they had running around. Seeing them scared me pretty bad. 2017, 2018, and even into 2019, the same cycle continued. I see something, whether voluntary or not, and it would get to me for some time after. Although as time went on, as it does so dutifully, these instances did get better, lasting at most 2 months towards the end to leave me feeling mostly okay. But that's still 4 long years of the same cycle repeating over and over again. I see something, and it would put me out of commission. 4 years. Time would eventually heal those wounds, but it would soon inflict more. It always did. Always. It always came back. This picks up back again in May of 2019. Once again, I was scrolling through YouTube when I clicked on the GTA Live channel, just to see if there's anything new. And there was. The day before, they had uploaded the first live stream of the VR game. The day before! I don't know how I managed to find it so soon, but it was a shock to me. It filled me with bewilderment, confusion, frustration, and depression. I was simultaneously asking why in a confused, angry, and defeated manner. It took me 2.5 days, I started getting bit on the last half, so I just found it up to 3, to get over this frustrated, depressed, complete, and utter confusion. Although I became curious again. I figured that I shouldn't watch it, but the morbid curiosity was too strong. I watched it, and all the subsequent live streams as well. This time, it was 2 to 3 months in total. The rest of 2019 was uneventful in the terms of the story, except once again for December. After following a series of links, I managed to find myself on the channel of Dawko. For the 3rd time, I managed to find one of these events coinciding with the release of one of the games, now the AR one. It was only a few days before that he began uploading videos on it. I knew from all the times previously that I shouldn't watch them, just like all the times previously, I watched them anyway. But somehow, this time was different. I was nervous watching them, but the aftermath was something completely unexpected. There was nothing. Nothing at all. Not a single thing. I wasn't scared or nervous or anxious. I was fine. This was an unprecedented event and left me cautiously optimistic. I wondered if I was somehow cured. Sure, the AR game may not be all that scary, but still, it didn't affect me in the slightest. Stuff much more docile had worse effects on me before. But now was different. It was an isolated incident, so I didn't want to put the cart before the horse and assume I was completely fine, only to put myself into a situation that would tear that notion down and then some. I wasn't sure, but I was hopeful, for the first time since forever, about the situation. 2020 proved to be a very strange year. I began to watch a lot of YouTube videos about fan games. Those didn't bother me. Kept up on the latest news finding the sequel to VR games DLC talked about. That didn't bother me. A new game in a franchise that I had hated so much in the past, not to mention the times when I unexpectedly came across something and it would send me into a few days of bewilderment. It didn't bother me. None of it did. Sure, in a perfect world where I could snap my fingers to do anything that I wished, I would have kept that sequel from happening, but in a perfect world, I wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. Somehow, for some reason, I just didn't care. In fact, I seemingly began to enjoy it. I may have been mildly excited for the sequel. Even though the part of me that hated this franchise still existed, although, again, had mellowed out over the years, it now had a share room with something else. The part of me that enjoyed it. Although looking back, I can say it probably really started back in 2019, it became more prominent in 2020. Those two parts occasionally fought, but by and large, it was fine. I was fine. 2020 seemed to be the closest I've ever been to experiencing bliss, at least in the confines of this story. Between my start to end and all the time in between, I was fine. Almost content. But time continued at its constant and continuous rate and brought in 2021. 2021 came, I started off the same way 2020 ended. Almost. I won the battle, but I was destined to lose the war. The first week or two kept what 2020 had going, but not perfectly. January of that same ill-fated year brought in the first trailer for that sequel, and suddenly, I cared. A lot. Finding that trailer on the internet brought back feelings I had not missed. Bewilderment, confusion, frustration, depression. I was simultaneously asking why in a confused, angry, and defeated manner. Another sequel in a franchise I had hated so much, why wouldn't it just die? It always came back, always. It always did. Although things would still be different. I had seemingly graduated from my fear. Maybe I really was over it. But it seemed evident that over the previous year it had changed tactics. I wasn't afraid anymore. That much was true. Instead, I was extremely stressed. I should rate the fact that this was because what was happening was something I really didn't want to. I was sad, frustrated, defeated, but above all confused about why this thing I hated so much continued to live. Well, not live. Thrive. Despite another 2.5 days, rounding up to 3, I could take solace in the fact that it was far off. After all, it was even delayed before, meaning I had much more time to not worry about it. Of course, though, I wouldn't always have time or be able to tell myself that it was far off. In comes March, another trailer there. A few more days for that. Then came the summer PlayStation event, and that one felt extra bad for some reason, even though it lasted for the same amount of time. Maybe that was when the feelings of bewilderment really set in? Then came the animated trailers. I knew it meant the game was coming soon, but it didn't really bother me then for some reason. Maybe because it didn't really show anything? Then the November one. After getting over the initial burning sensation due to the shock, I became worried. And rightly so. Another trailer? It just kept getting closer. The morbid curiosity set in again, and I watched it. But as you know, this trailer has an extra surprise. The release date. I now had a tangible date to worry and stress over, and it was in a month and a half. Once the 16th of November came up, I noticed to myself that there was only 1 month left. One singular month. It was really then that I started to get worried, but things really set in 1 week after with it only being 3 weeks left. Soon after, I remember realizing it was the last day of November and saying, oh, that's not good. After November comes December, the 1st and the 2nd. That left only 2 short, measly weeks left. That's only 14 days, and that's not a whole lot of time. My stress levels were already prevalent, but now the only option was high gear. Then comes the 3rd. I was worried. Then comes the 4th. I was stressed. Then comes the 5th. I was anxious. But for better or worse, time continued to tick. It did so at a constant and continuous rate, not caring about my feelings or what was going on in the world. After a few short, measly days, the 9th. 1 week. 7 days. Soon the 10th was brought, now the day numbers were the double digits, the same as the release date, but time continued to tick and I was brought the 11th. 5 days. But time continued to tick and I was brought the 12th. 4 days. But time continued to tick and I was brought the 13th. 3 short days. But time continued to tick and I was brought the 14th. 2 measly days. To be frank, it wasn't filled 100% with pure, unbridled, unadulterated stress as purest definition. In a few instances, although none more than 30 minutes, and somehow the entirety of the 14th, I was able to twist it into a better thing. I was able to convince myself that it wouldn't be that bad, that I could actually make something good come of it. But I was never a very good knot tire, and it quickly became unraveled. But any good I had going for me on the 14th, I wasn't able to carry into the 15th. The day before, the time in between me and the release could no longer be measured in days, but hours. I knew then and even now that this was a stupid and irrational thing to get stressed out over, but fear does not operate under rationality. That entire time, but even more so then, I wish I could have done something, anything, to put even 1 or 2 short seconds in between me and it. But I couldn't. There wasn't a single thing that I or anybody around me could do. It was going to happen, and I knew this. I knew there wasn't a single thing that I could do, that I was helpless, yet that was a part of the reason I was so stressed out. Because I couldn't do anything, even though I so desperately wanted to, was a contributing factor. Again, I understand that this was and is a very stupid ordeal, but I couldn't help it. I hated it so much, but it continued to live and thrive. I wanted it to die, drop off the face of the earth. All the times it had punched me and kicked me in the gut prior, and it continued to exist against my better judgment. That, I suppose, is the reason for my feelings. The feeling of helplessness grew as did my desperation to do something. But time continued to tick and slip away from me. Every second that went by was 1 second closer, and those were mounted to hours, which I turned into days, which I turned into weeks. Every second counted, but I just couldn't do anything. The 16th could be best described as a rocky day for me. It started off with me having twisted it to something good again, but that didn't last long. The 16th was a transitional period moving from intense anticipation to dealing with the aftermath. It had happened against my better judgment, but I was determined to make the best of a bad situation. That something good that I've mentioned was actually me telling myself if I played the darn game, it wouldn't actually be that bad. Heck, I could even make YouTube videos about it. I figured that may be the best way to alleviate my stress. The idea of doing that even has its own story. It began back in the summer, which I felt somewhat obligated to do, which is another story, which then turned to the idea of what if I did it ironically, given my thoughts and feelings about the franchise, to me more or less planning on it, to me figuring that playing the game would be the best option to get rid of my stress, making it the default option in the moment, or because it came with the risk of being an incredibly bad idea. Naturally, even the silver lining had its own issues. Because I was so stressed out and I figured this was the best thing to do, I wanted to do it now. It took me 4 to 5 days to get to the point of being able to play the game, depending on how you want to count it. In the hours before I first played the game, I was once again full of adrenaline, and my mind was abuzz. I couldn't help but think, am I really doing this? Am I really going to play this game in a franchise I hated so much in the past? It could be best described as a nervous, perhaps confused anticipation. On the 20th of December, 2021, I clicked on the new icon on the monitor and introduced myself yet again. and I played the darn game. If I could go back in time a few years and tell myself that I would end up doing what I did, I probably would have thought you were full of it. Even though I was nervous, given, well, everything, I continued and didn't chicken out. I even edited the video and willingly uploaded it, despite being nervous and still thinking to myself, am I really doing this? That brings me to right now. The story is still going on. And as to the future, I don't know what it holds. At least, not yet. I'll likely remember doing this and silently laugh my naivety as I go into the exact same situation again. But I figure I'll just cross that bridge when I come to it, because that worked so well for me in the past. It should be obvious at this point that my opinion on this franchise can rapidly change. I like it, yet hate it at the same time, living as on the fence as anyone can be. But when it does something, anything, chances are high that my burning hatred will rise again. At least for a few days. Well, I don't even know if that's going to happen or not. But, well, if it does, that's just one more line in my story. So, right here, this is the end of my story. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening yet again, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Alright? Goodbye.